Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lydie's Book Club, August live read along. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, in which I host live readings of adaptations of classics of English literature and contemporary novels. Each month, we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. And once a week, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop via Zoom to discuss the chapters of the book that we are currently reading, or the chapters of the book that we've read over the week. And in this book club, I tend to prioritize books that are written by women. And this month, we are reading the contemporary novel Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is her debut novel, and we're reading this book in its integral text. That's something new that we've experimented this summer. This is the second book that we are reading in its integral text. So for that, you need to have a C1 level in English minimum, because otherwise you're not gonna really enjoy the reading and also the session, the live workshop sessions. So bear that in mind. If you'd like to know more about the novel and Julia Armfield's work, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 23, an introduction to Julia Armfield and Our Wives Under the Sea, which is available on this YouTube channel, Lydie's Book Club YouTube channel, and also on Lydie's Book Club Spotify podcast called Read in English. So you can find this podcast on these two platforms as well. So today it's session 6 of Our Wives Under the Sea live read along, and we are going to read pages 101 to 134. You can find all the upcoming dates and times on my website or on Instagram. You just click on the link in the description of this video, and all the live readings are available on replay on this YouTube channel and on the Spotify podcast as well. And in addition to these 10 live reading sessions, I'm hosting 3 live workshops based on the novel, so that the members of the book club have the opportunity to improve their speaking skills and share their views on the novel. And it's a great opportunity to exchange with other members of the book club. These live workshops are hosted on Zoom, so you have to become a member of the book club to be part of the conversation. And there are going to be other opportunities as well that we'll make available in the book club. So lots of stuff coming up. You can find all the information on the upcoming workshops on the link in the description as well. We've done 1 live workshop already, and there are going to be another one, the second session this Saturday. And also, I'm pleased to announce that you can now purchase the 3-part live workshop on Daisy Jones and the Six, which is our July live read along. Again, we read this book in its integral text. So you need to have a C1 advanced level in English to appreciate this book. Yes, you can purchase these 3 sessions on my website. And once you purchase the workshop, you have access to a private space with your login and to have access to the videos and watch them whenever you want. So let's get started. Hi, Keti. Thank you for joining. So I'm going to do a quick recap of our session, our last session, which was yesterday, session 5. So we read pages 75 to 100. So we are now in the midnight zone. So I'm also on Instagram as well. So if I'm looking this way, it means that there are going to be interactions with people here. So lots of stuff. So here, yes, I was saying that we started a new zone, the midnight zone, and actually yesterday we learned through Leah's chapter the meanings of these different layers, the meaning of these different zones, and she clearly explains to us, reader, and not necessarily familiar and not necessarily aware of the meaning of those different layers, although we looked up online to check what these zone meant, and actually they describe the 5 main layers to the ocean. So in page 76, Leah describe in details the meaning of these different zones and what kind of creature we can find in the ocean at this stage. And we learned that from the twilight zone or the midnight zone, the ocean is completely dark, and it's quite scary as well. So, and knowing that then there is the abyssal zone and then the adal zone. So it's the bottom. The abyssal zone is actually so it's the adal zone, sorry, is what we could identify as the bottom of the ocean, but it's down to 36,000 feet, sorry. So it's very deep in the ocean. So there is those different how is it called, layers of the earth that are piled up. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not going to go into much details about those different zones. You can look up online and search for them, but at least this is what we learn here: the different stages, the different layers of the ocean. And what is interesting personally, and what we could reflect on, is that these different zones represent, or this is my interpretation of these, the meaning of these zones, and the fact that the book is structured in relation to these different zones. And to me, it represents the different stage of Miri and Leah's relationship, and eventually, I don't know what's gonna happen, but it doesn't seem to be very positive. Eventually they might not stay together, I don't know, but maybe this is the interpretation that I take from the understanding of these different layers of the ocean, and the fact that there is an end to something, and that's my interpretation of this. So it would be interesting to know what you think about. What do you think? Do you agree with me, or do you think that it means something else, or I don't know. So it would be interesting to read your comments and see what you think about it. Later on, we have a passage in Miri's chapter in which we learn that at the time of Leah being in the mission, and at the stage where they were still in the ocean. 3 weeks had passed. At the point of the end of these 3 weeks, the center, so remember that the mission was meant to last 3 weeks, but it ended, in the end, it lasted 6 months. And we learn from Miri here that after the 3 weeks, she received a phone call from the center informing her that the vessel has been delayed. Not much information. It stays quite vague, but she had nothing to worry about. It was all, everything will be okay. And then starts a phase for Miri in which she starts getting worried, and she's trying to find support in a newspaper or online. She finds this online forum in which you've got these women imagining having husbands and imagining scenarios of their husbands being in the mission, in a space mission. And it's quite surreal when we read about it. And they role play, those women role play that their husbands had gone to space, and they imagine that he hasn't come back, or he has come back wrong. So there are loads of acronyms, meaning before space or earthbound, came back wrong, CBW, MHIS. So men in my husband in space. Anyway, so something, so really quite surreal to read in the narrative. So it was quite and a little bit funny as well. And what I take from Miri's narrative is that she's always in between dream and reality. You see, there's often the verb I imagined, I dream, I dream, or I wanted to say, or it's always and then back to reality, and we read that actually this is not what happened, in fact. And here is the same when she's trying to seek support in this news agent, in this on in newspaper, and she's saying, I imagined pulling a card from some hidden place and holding it up to the light. Wife under the sea, here's the number. So she can't find any adverts saying that there is a group of, she only finds choirs, adverts for choirs, or Addicts Anonymous, or a phone line for smokers, or for a book group. So she's dreaming that she would find, she imagined that she would find this card in which it's written wife under the sea. Well, call this number. but she doesn't, because it's not necessary. It's not very common to have a wife who. There are some women, but not so. It's not as common as being an addict and having addiction issues. So yeah, it makes you smile when you read and you uh, when you read Miri's inner thoughts and uh, and imagine all the silly things that everyone imagine in their life. Or you create stories, and that's exactly what this character does, and what the author does with this character. Um, what other important facts happen? What else happened here? So she's trying to find support. She, in the meantime, she's trying to carry on with her life, and she's invited to a party with some of their friends from university. They were Leah's friends, and they invited Miri in their house, and after 4 months of Leah's absence, the center is still unreachable. They can't find any information. The Miri cannot reach the center, and when you realize, and it's quite unexpected when you see that it's been 4 months that the whole crew is gone, and the vessel hasn't come back. It's quite unexpected to see that the center is not really taking the time to inform and reassure, bring support to the members of to the relatives of the member of the crew. So Keti is saying, I'm afraid that Leah misses the ocean so much that she feels like a fish and wants to return to the ocean. Yeah. Yeah. There is something in Leah's behavior that shows that she's attached to the ocean somehow. And this is what we talked about last session, is that point there is a description of Leah not wanting to leave the house because Miri managed to get therapy sessions, because this is what we realize, page 95, is that since the beginning, since Leah got back, Miri is trying to call the center, and she's asking them something, but we didn't know what. And at page 95, finally, she managed to get a support, to get something, and she got those therapy sessions, and they are attending. They've been attending one, and before they went to the center to go to the session, Miri is telling that it's been difficult for Leah to go out of the house. It says she no longer enjoys the process of dressing, find fabrics painful next to her skin. So wearing clothes is uncomfortable for her. and groans at the prospect of shoes, of walking. So she's not able to wear shoes, and in a way finds them uncomfortable. It seems like it. And on coming home again, I find that a toenail has come clean off inside her walking boots, although she seems unaware of this and moves to sit on the sofa. And without quite knowing what I'm doing, I move over to the sink and spoon a small measure of table salt into a glass of water for Leah to drink. So remember that Leah is only drinking water. Basically, this is her diet, and drinking water and salt. So she put the salt in the water. So as if, remember, as you might know, the ocean is salty. There is salt in the ocean. So this is why we were actually reflecting and thinking that Leah has become a fish or something. She's been so long under the water in this vessel that now she misses the ocean and she just wants to go back. She transformed, she mutated. She mutated, sorry. So yeah, and that's basically what happened in the sessions in these couple pages in this passage. Okay, now let's start. I'm going to put some light because otherwise I can't see anything. Okay, let's go. Leah. At some point, Jelka had produced a small plastic figurine of Saint Brendan Clonfair and set it down beside one of the torches. She now sat on the floor in front of the way one might huddle around a fireplace, her neck bent to such a degree that bulging white marbles of her vertebrae showed up like something seeking exit through her skin. She had told me once that you prayed with saints, not to them. Correcting a turn of phrase I think I must have inherited from Miri, who was a Catholic obvious at best. Praying to a saint would be a gesture of idolatry, Jelka had said, seeming to smirk at herself, but carrying on regardless. You pray so that a saint will make an intercession to God on your behalf. Spiritually speaking, it's like diving with a buddy. Jelka's Catholicism had always been a curious part of her, a white-hot core to a person I otherwise knew to be brisk and rational and often cold-blooded, little given to panic, but simultaneously hard to placate once panic had set in. We had worked together frequently on research projects at our facility, had transferred to the center together, and I had always known her to be smarter than me, a little aloof, but given to sharing lunches, rarely open about things that Matteo and I discussed freely and often. I wasn't sure, for instance, if she had any siblings, a partner, parents she cared for. All things about which I typically like to ask, because I knew that Miri would be interested to know. I didn't know if she'd ever been in love, if she considered the concept of love important. I didn't know what it was she might think about Miri and me as two women together. One thing I did know about Jelka was her her saints. As a child, she had been an altar server at her church in central Harlem, and growing up had been blazingly convinced by the time she hit adulthood, Catholic policy would have bent to oncoming modernity enough to allow her to train as a priest. This having proved incorrect, she had taken to somewhat sideways step of training in marine ecology and conservation, and had ultimately spent several years completing field work on the New Caledonian Barrier Reef before we met. When I asked her once, with a glibness which really should have been embarrassing, if the appeal of the ocean lay to her in some sense of religious universality, of God being everywhere, she had shaken her head and told me, no, what it is that I'm fucking furious. I can't do the thing that I wanted to do. And I feel better in places where there aren't any churches. I was pretty chastened by this and didn't ask her any personal questions for a long time afterwards, which I think is what she hoped. Saint Brendan of Clonfert is the patron saint of mariners, more specifically the patron saint of sailors, divers, adventurers, travelers, and for whatever reason, whales. He was one of several saints. I associated particularly with Jelka, one of several saints whose existence I had come to recognize because of her. As a teenager, so she told me once, she had passed through fleeting passions for saints, the way most people ran through movie stars, fixating short bursts of ardor upon Saint Erasmus, Saint Augustine, Saint Clare of Assisi, Saint Benedict, Saint Genevieve, and Saint Anne. At the age of 13, she had conceived a particular passion for Saint Lidwina, a Dutch mystic partially paralyzed after breaking her rib in a fall on the ice. This fall, so the teenage Jelka had read with the breathlessness that accompanies a crush, precipitated a lifetime of physical hardship, from gangrene and bleeding from the nose and mouth to parts of the body falling off, to blindness and even stigmata. My favorite part of the story, she told me, but that she fasted. She was in that much pain, bits of her skin coming away, pieces of her body, and she was still so devout that she fasted for God. I was bloodthirsty. I was a bloodthirsty little bitch when you think about it. I loved that so much. I read this book once that said that all she ate were apples and dates, and all she drank was salt water. I remember the way she told this story, the way she touched a hand to her lips directly afterwards, as though checking for excess moisture. Saint Brendan is less of a horror story, although no less compelling in its way. An Irish saint and seafarer, he sailed the Atlantic in search of the Garden of Eden, encountering devils, griffins, and sea monsters. Jelka told me this story whilst half asleep a long time ago. Midnight on the Coral Triangle, the two of us bunking together on a trip. We were working for a conservationist project in tandem with our old facility, collecting data on biofluorescence in cryptic fish species. And the hours were long, leading to curious, overtired conversation that simultaneously rambled and went nowhere. There are different stories, I remember, she said, tight-voiced, moved her hands through the darkness. Sometimes the journey is sometimes the journey is his own quest for the Holy Land, and sometimes the journey is a punishment. He does something wrong, and so an angel sets him out onto the ocean and makes him sail for 9 years. Heavy-handed, but then things to do with angels usually are. In the sea, in the dark, there isn't time, not in the way you would ordinarily perceive it. It can be hard to force your body into working order, hard to recognize the natural breaks between awake and asleep, aware and unconscious. Of course, there are typically ways to combat this, protocols that submarines follow, maintaining a 24-hour watch schedule, operating a light system that cycles through various stages of brightness and dimness, dependent on time of day. Without these kind of assurance, the circadian rhythms can swiftly begin to break down. A few days can be all it takes. As we were now, without power in our sunken craft, it would become very hard, very quickly, to keep things from going awry. I sat with Jelka and looked at the silhouette of the saint where it sat against the torchlight. At some point, I must have slept, though I'm unclear as to exactly when this started. Okay, Miri's chapter now. I didn't date as a teenager. Missed the boat due in part to an excess of panic. At the age of 13, I became obsessed with venereal diseases, misunderstood my way into a locked box from which I then spent the rest of my teens attempting to extract myself. At some point, I had come to understand that somewhere at the core of sex as an activity lay the possibility not only of illness, but specifically of bodily harm. And this conviction, once formed, proved difficult to shake. My school years consisted predominantly of sweating through my shirts and obsessing over physical contact. I spent hours mentally constructing the pressure of a hand on my knee, pressed the crease of my thumb, and forefinger into the side of my neck to simulate kissing. Comprehensively failed to learn how to masturbate. I thought confusedly and often of a girl who sat in front of me in geography. Imagined us becoming close friends, so close that everyone else in our year was jealous. I neglected to deal with the hair on my upper lip, whilst ritualistically waxing my underarm upwards of 6 times a month. I thought a lot about the men from the movies I enjoyed, but mostly in the context of their being eaten by sharks or falling from high buildings or otherwise breaking apart. Remember the film Jaws that talks about this shark eating people. So here's a little reference to it, I guess. At the age of 18, for reasons unknown to me now, I allowed a boy named Jeremy Fox to kiss me at the end of term party, and afterwards spent several weeks imagining him biting my arm until the blood came, which of course he hadn't done. At the age of 22, I kissed a boy at a university bar whose name I forget about, whose name I forget, but whose methods I still remember. Hard yank to the back of my neck and all his teeth at once, as though he were using me to floss with. The men I kissed, the men I kissed were typically of middle height, dark haired, and gently anodyne. I worked my way up to the giving of occasional hand jobs and even more occasional throw jobs, and panicked for weeks afterwards about what I might have caught. I refused to have penetrative sex with any of them, imagined sex as a kind of battering, and after a while they went away with little in the way of hard feelings. At the age of 24, I went on an internet date with a man who kissed me hard against the railing of a bridge and told me conversationally that he was a dom. But then grew upset when I told him to stop pulling my hair. I don't feel safe with you, he said, and didn't call me again. When I told this story to Leah years later, she told me he couldn't have been the right kind of dom. Not sure about the meaning of dom. So if you know, leave me a comment. And after this live reading, I will check the actual meaning of the dominator of dom. It's capital D. I don't know. They can be hard to find, she said. Took the inside of my wrist and kissed. They can be hard to find, she said. Took the inside of my wrist and kissed it. Then smiled when I told her I thought I'd said to keep her arms above her head. Maybe he was just sensing that the two of you weren't compatible. Sex with Leah was a key and a lock, an opening up of something I had assumed impassable. Like a door wrapped shut by the heat. Joy in the fact of pleasure, in the fact of my own relief. When we fucked, I felt myself distinct from my previous versions. The frenzied me, the panicked me, the me who had imagined herself poisoned by something she had never even done. I don't think Leah said to me once that the problem was really you. I don't think Leah said to me once that the problem was really you. She was lying beneath me, her light hair, her strong chin, the way she had of widening her eyes when I came too close as if to encompass the whole of me better. And when I made a questioning noise, she kissed the side of my face. I just mean, she said, that being afraid of sex isn't typically anyone's fault. It's just a question of circumstance. The last time before she went away, the last time, full stop. Oh, Keti, you looked into dom, a person who takes the dominant role in BDSM sexual activities. Right. So this was my initial thinking. Yeah. Okay. So someone that is dominant, a dom. Okay, with capital D. Okay, great. Okay, so now we know a new expression in the domain of sexual activities. That's interesting. And if you didn't know this term, guys, well, we're happy to serve. Okay. Where was I? The last time before she went away. The last time, full stop. I pushed her into the mattress and held her there, pressed my palm into the indent of her throat, and then released, and then press again. Hold my throat when I come, she said to me once. That way you can feel the noises before I make them. It was light still, forgetful afternoon, charmed hour before the coming on before the coming on of evening. The going away party was scheduled for the next night. Shall we pretend I'm going to war? She said, and I laughed and bite the insides of her thighs the way she liked me to. And later on, she kissed me and crooked her fingers inside me, twisted them around almost 180 degrees. The way we had discovered, so trial and error was the only way that worked. I remember her legs, the smudge of green bruises, synthetic citrus smell of her underarms. I remember the way that her hair rose static from the crown and then fell again. I remember the way she looked at me, the open surge of her gaze, like I was something I had invented, brought to life by the powers of electricity, and set down there in the last of the light. Okay, so a different time. Carmen is eating toast. Oh, sorry. Carmen is eating toast. Tells me I should see somebody about that look on my face. Chronic bitch face is naturally distinct from resting bitch face, you know. It's like a whole different ball game when you can't turn it off. She has some good news about her eyesight. She's had some good news about her eyesight. Might be eligible for experimental surgery that will aim to reverse the degeneration. She squints at a triangle of toast through her glasses, spreads her free hand beside it. My hand looks like toast. Everything looks like toast, she says, and pushes away from the table to order another coffee at the counter. When she gets back, she's bearing a coffee for me as well as one for herself. She sets it down in front of me as a sort of peace offering. I'm sorry I said that about your face, she says, quite earnestly, gesturing to her own eyes. What do I know anyway? It occurs to me that I ought to apologize to her, though for what I'm not quite sure. I feel angry at nothing, ashamed at myself for using her as one of my few escapes from the flat. I look down at the coffee she's bought me. It's chocolate dusted heart already sinking into the foam. I think about Sam and wonder why everyone seems so set on bringing me coffee. Later on back home, I become briefly convinced that Leah has vanished. I move from room to room, checking wardrobes, opening drawers, and upsetting piles of clothes from the armchairs on which I've allowed them to gather. I check the latch of the bathroom window, stare for several unhinged seconds of the drain in the base of the sink, but then there she is, of course, standing in the bathroom doorway in her floor length dressing gown. As though nothing has happened. And I can't understand how I missed her. I wonder, Miri, says the therapist, so back to the therapy session, whether you have properly taken the time to imagine what it is your wife has been through. There is a difference, of course, between understanding and forgiving, and I don't believe one necessarily prompts the other, but it might be easier for you to cope with the fact of now if you choose to contend with the truth of before. The therapist is tall and straight, both in the sense of her sexuality and in the sense of her everything else. When she makes straight being straight in terms of sexuality, it means that she loves men. She's a woman in love with men. in the relationship with men. When she makes notes during the session, her handwriting rises and falls without listing. Her talk is long and thin. She stirs her coffee with the flat of a knife. I don't understand, I reply, looking at the side of Leah's face with an attempt at frankness that I hope is mirrored in my tone, because she never tells me anything. I know you went away. Oh, sorry, I don't understand. Oh, okay. Now it's look in the side that I hope I mirror in my tone. Oh no, it's fine. Still Miri. Sorry, I thought it was some. Because she never tells me anything. I know you went away, and I know you stayed longer than you meant to, and I know you must miss it. You must miss it now, or else. Why do you run the taps all night and carry your sound box everywhere you go? Problem is, I don't know what it is you miss. I don't know what it is at all. What is it you imagine? Leah says to me, though her eyes are now on the therapist. What is it you imagine when you think about where I was? I look at her for a long moment before pushing myself up out of my chair and crossing to the bookshelf by the door. I take the thickest book I can find from the shelf and carry it back to the coffee table. Pull a slip of paper from my own handbag and hold it up for a moment before sliding it between the very last page of the book and the back cover. Then I allow the whole heavy weight of the 300 or so preceding pages plus front cover to fall shut. The slip of paper sticks out between the final page and back cover like a bookmark, and I think of how I felt the viewing deck years ago when she left, not for this last trip, but for another. The thing I wished had said louder. I'm not sure a ship like that can take the whole of the ocean on top of it. I'm not sure they can all go down that deep and not be crushed. This is how I imagine it, I say, and watch as Leah's eye travels slowly from the therapist to rest upon the book with the little strip of paper crushed beneath the weight of its pages. We have to catch the bus back from the therapist's office. And on the journey back, Leah nearly loses her footing climbing up to the top deck, claiming afterwards that she suddenly lost sensation in her hands. Just the fingertips, she says when I press her, allowing me to take hold of her hands and examine them, though after a moment the feeling appears to become too much for her and she pulls them away. She is dressed in loose trousers, long-sleeved shirt with a high collar. Beneath her shirt, the bones of her shoulders swing the way a hanger will when not inside a wardrobe. When she talks, her tongue is white, indented with tooth marks, though in truth these days she talks less and less. Okay, different time frame. When Leah was gone, when I became convinced that she had died and no one had thought to tell me, I grew briefly obsessed with a website for people whose loved ones had disappeared. Here again, trying to find support online. It was better and worse than the message board for it was better and worse than the message board for the wives of imaginary spacemen. In as much as the conversation was typically less ridiculous, but the stories universally worse. The people who posted were mourning the losses of lovers and siblings and parents in the throes of dementia, who had wandered away from secure facilities, sisters who had run off in stolen hatchbacks, friends who had simply vanished, the way that people often do. I say mourning. I say mourning, though of course the abstract of grief is different, without a body, without a point from which to hang the solid object of one's pain. Does anyone else find the possibility of the comeback kind of worse than the idea of death? Someone posted. Not that you don't want them to return, but rather that's the tormenting thing, the thought that they might do. Something I learned very quickly was that grieving was complicated by lack of certainty, that the hope inherent in a missing loved one was also a species of curse. People posted about children who had gone missing upwards of 15 years ago and whose faces were now impossible to conjure, about friends who had messaged to confirm a meeting place and then simply never showed up. In almost every case, the sense of loss was convoluted by an ache of possibility, by the almost but not quite negligible hope of reprieve. Deus ex machina, the missing loved one thrown back down to earth. Grief is selfish. We cry for ourselves without the person we have lost far more than we cry for the person. But more than that, that's very interesting here. We cry for ourselves, but with that, we cry for ourselves without the person that we have lost far more than we cry for the person. But more than that, we cry because it helps. The grief process is also the coping process. And if the grief is frozen by ambiguity, by the constant possibility of reversal, then so is the ability to cope. It's not grief, one woman posted. It's more like a haunting. As her sister had disappeared for 2 decades, so 20 years. Decades is 10 years. 2 decades previously. Ran away or otherwise removed by the back door of their childhood home when she was 15 years old. There was no proof that anything bad had happened, the woman typed. No proof of anything at all. They told her hope wasn't lost so often that it became impossible to live with it. It's too hard, trying to exist between these poles of hope and death. You just find yourself imagining all these possibilities, all these possible sisters wandering around half unseen like people with sheets over their head, except that somewhere among them, you know that one of them's real, one of them's dead, one of them's the ghost. I found I liked this woman, read her updates with particular interest, and scrolled the website in the early morning as this appeared to be her favorite time to post. More than once, I found myself building up to writing her a message, typing sentences that I then deleted, refashioned, deleted again. I used to hope, I typed once, that I died before my partner, even though I knew that was selfish. I used to think that I hoped I'd die before she died, and before the planet died, and really just generally before things got any worse. I didn't send this message, specifically because it seemed to imply that my views had changed when they hadn't. Okay, now chapter of Leah. I had slept, and when I had, I had dreamt about Miri. I saw the warm dark. I saw the warm dark, the changing light of the aquarium, at which I had worked in my teens. In the dream, Miri held my hand by the open ocean tank, pulled me down onto a viewing bench, and kissed me just beneath my collar. I love it here, she said. I love the way it moves. I opened my mouth to tell her about all the different species we could find in the tank, and she shook her head, clapped her hand to my lips. Don't do that, she said, though my mouth was already leaking water. I had woken shortly after that. I didn't want to sleep again until I had to. Time passed. I don't know how much or how quickly. We changed the batteries in the torches and ate because there was food in the lockers and we knew we ought to eat. At some point, Jelka lay down on the floor of the main deck and went to sleep. Matteo sat by the comms deck, idly pressing and repressing the transmission button, and at one point began to whistle farewell and adieu to your fair Spanish ladies again. I sat on the floor beside Jelka, stretched my legs out and thought about showering. They had made a big fuss of the wash store the first time they showed us the craft. A woman from the center throwing open the door to present us with the sink, the toilet, and shower heads, like someone on a home makeover show revealing a lavish suite. The distillation system is state of the art, the woman said, rubbing a cuff across the shower dial, like you might do with a new car. Brings the water in from the outside and purifies it. Maximum efficiency, as much fresh water as you need. No Navy showers here. Theoretically, you could keep the shower on for hours without encountering problems. Turn the tap on in the sink too, if you like. Have a party. I had nodded at her, watched her continue to buff at the shower dial for several seconds before moving back into the rear chamber. So this passage might reflect, might make you think. Well, it makes me think about the moment where the fact that Leah is constantly opening tabs. So that's probably related to that shower system. Now on the floor of the main deck, I turned the image of the shower dial over in my mind. If the shower still worked, then we still had fresh water. If we still had fresh water, then things were not quite critical yet. It occurred to me that given the CO2 scrubbers were still running, there was every chance the water distillation function was still operational too. I decided to note this as a positive, though I delayed the act of actually getting up and checking until it was absolutely necessary. No reason to think the worst until it was actually happening. Propped up beside my legs, Jelka was frowning in her sleep. I wasn't sure why we hadn't gone through to the rear chamber, which was altogether more comfortable. Perhaps we assumed that the second we did, the comstake would spring to life unnoticed, and that whoever was calling for us would assume we were lost and switched off. Matteo was technically the engineer, though all three of us had been trained to a level that we ought to have been able to fix whatever was wrong. The problem, of course, was that nothing was wrong, aside from the fact of the obvious. We were all breathing normally. There was no indication that the craft was failing to bear up the external pressure. As Matteo had already found, there were no obvious faults, no flashing lights, no jams in the system. The craft had slowed the craft had slowed itself down prior to impact with the ground. As the following command, it should no longer have been capable of following. Aside from the fact that we were unable to move in any direction and unable to communicate, it was really a 10 out of 10 maiden voyage. Have you ever, so a different time frame? Have you ever heard of the tektite habitat? This was an underwater laboratory and living station designed and built round about the late 1960s as a base from which to study marine life. Also different topics, not necessarily different time frame, but different topic here. Definitely. This was an underwater laboratory and living station designed and built around about the late 1960s as a base from which to study marine life, closely resembling a pair of connected grain silos. It sat at seabed. It sat at seabed level at Great Lameshore Bay, and was used in preparation for NASA's Apollo missions from early 1969, when the moon landing was just a month away. In the main, NASA used the base to study the behavior and psychology of small crews living in extreme close quarters and biomedical responses to long stretches spent in oxygen-controlled conditions that unlike those of spacecraft. Several teams were sent down to live for 10 or 20 days stretches underwater, though my favorite among these has always been the team led by Sylvia Earle, a renowned biologist and explorer, which also happened to be the first all-female saturation dive team in history. I read about this in my father's diving almanac, and again in a book I once stole from his study called 101 Deep Sea Dives of Note. 101 deep sea dives of note. In a team consisting of 4 scientists and 1 engineer, Earle's crew spent 2 weeks underwater, documenting marine plant life, while at the same time being studied themselves, both for their behavior in insulation and in a frankly unavoidable way for their choice of swimwear. They called us the aquababes. Earle said once in an article I cut out and kept, the aquanauties, all sort of things. On emerging from the water, they were an immediate media sensation, with the focus squarely on their wetsuit and bikinis, and really the inescapable Bond girl sexiness of the whole thing, of these women and their underwater lair. Among the many things my father collected, he had a stash of old New Yorker magazines dating back as far as the 1972. A stash means is a pile. He kept these in a series of old wine crates, which he stacked in his garage, and periodically allowed me to root through. I assumed to get me out of his hair. In his garage, and periodically allowed me to root through, I assumed to get me out of his hair. I was, so out of his hair is an expression to meaning that, so that she wasn't in his, she could have, he would allow her to look at the newspapers so that he could carry on with what he was doing. He wouldn't be bothered by her. So being out of his hair means that she wasn't in his legs. Let's say we have the same expression in French, but with legs. Not legs, but like the yeah the what's it called? The legs of the legs of animals. We call them, I don't know what we call them, paws, not sure. So that's the expression, and in English is they say out of his hair, to out of your hair or out of my hair, whatever. I was 13 when I found a copy from July 1989 that contained a profile of Sylvia Earle entitled A Deepness. It was a detailed rundown of a long and widely impressive life of deep sea exploration, and I immediately whisked it away to read. One of my favorite parts of the article, the whole of which I read 7 or 8 times in the space of one weekend, was when Earle talked about the tektite habitat, explaining that the Washington Review Committee in charge of selecting teams to man the station hadn't actually expected women to apply at all. There were still some remarkably prudish attitudes in Washington in those days, she said, and the people in charge just couldn't cope with the idea of men and women living together underwater. It was seemingly for this reason, really more than any desire to push the envelope, that the first female dive team was born. It makes sense when you think about it. My father said when I brought the article, it makes sense when you think about it, my father said when I brought the article to him. Actually, a pretty neat solution to a problem. Really, they should take this into account with space exploration too. No chance of crewmates getting involved with each other when it's all women. No distraction, no nookie, no city buggers. Clever in its way. I said nothing to this, although later on I lay and thought about these women. Imagine myself a crewmate aboard the Tektite, the ghostly shoals of fish beyond the bubbled portholes, the tangled kelp, the stillness, the sudden scuds of light. Now, on the floor of the main deck, I thought about this again, tried to remember the longest any team had submerged on the Tektite, the longest it was advisable to submerge. Do you smell it? Jelka said, and I looked down at her, unsure of how long she had been awake. Smell what? Matteo said, though his expression did not match the question, as though he already knew the answer. It was the smell of something burning, of meat straight of the bone. So Leah already mentioned this meat burning. So maybe at some we see here how the author keeps the suspense. So what is this meat burning? I want to know. Okay, Miri. I run beside the canal in the early mornings, and afterwards I usually go to the cafe near the municipal leisure center, where I drink 2 coffees in quick succession before heading back. There is a man at the cafe by the leisure center who has, at least 3 occasions, written his number down on my receipt when I have paid for my coffees. Oh, very forward. I'm not entirely sure why he keeps doing he keeps doing this when at no point has it yielded results. Perhaps he believes that as yet I simply haven't noticed. Perhaps he's just a sexual predator. But either way, he does it again this morning as I hand over my change. I am briefly annoyed at the whole situation, briefly alarmed, and then it occurs to me that all I need to do is tell him I have a girlfriend, which is not true. I have a wife. But people seem to find that cute in a way they don't when I just say girlfriend. I look at him for several seconds, holding my coffees in both hands and not saying anything. And then I said to him abruptly, "Please stop doing that." And I leave without taking my receipt. This happens one this happened once, a long time ago. Leah and I on an early date, and a man in between us at the bar, forcing a leg between our stools with the forward thrusting motion of someone preventing an elevator door from closing. "Are you sisters?" he had said. And she told him, "Yes," and then kissed my. He had said, "Oh, are you sisters?" He had said, and she told him yes, and then kissed my open mouth. Oh, so it's probably Leah. Okay, Leah kissing her. Arsis, he had said, and she told him yes, and then kissed my open mouth. Leah is in the bathroom. The sound machine playing, the phone ringing. My bad tooth is aching. Though I'm not doing my best to ignore it. Our quarterly water bill is in the region of 12 times above average, and I have no clear idea of how we're going to pay it. I've been going through the papers from Leah's transfer to the center, trying to make sense of a number of things I thought I already knew. I'm unsure, for instance, of exactly when it was that Leah's job became obscure to me, when I stopped knowing what it was she was doing on a daily basis, when still assuming I did. I'm thinking again about the going away party, about the people there I didn't know. I'm thinking about a man Leah described in joking terms as the boss, as though she were referring to Bruce Springsteen. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to speak. To Bruce Springsteen, pointing out a man in pressed jeans and a sports jacket who didn't make a speech when others did, but afterwards ate a total of 12 cocktail sausages from the buffet table and apologized when he jostled me en route to the salad bowl. I remember him the way I think you often remember unimportant things, too clearly, and in too much detail. The way your memory will relinquish important things, yet conjure the bright sense of a boring landscape or a throwaway conversation. So I remember the dark upward sweep of his hair and the etched insignia of his ring, like the lines of an eye. I remember the way he stepped back politely to give me space and asked if I enjoyed the party. And I remember, too, the way that shortly afterwards he departed without ceremony, and no one commented on the fact that he had gone. "We are prouder than ever before," a woman from the center declared into a microphone, "of all we as a company has achieved, and more certain than ever before that we stand at the vanguard of further discovery. We know already that life exists everywhere, even in the places as yet inaccessible, and we know too that life has things to teach us and must be thought and must be sought out. I see my mother in myself, though less in the sense of inherited features and more in the sense of an intruder poorly hidden behind a curtain. I see her impatience in the skin of my neck, her anger in the way my hands move. I see her when I press my tongue into the inside of my cheek with irritation, yet refuse to do anything to make a situation better. I see her when I assume people are worse than they turn out to be. When my mother used to smile, a rarity. The skin at the side of her mouth rippled back like a stone thrown into water. In physical terms, there is nothing to a smile. 12 to 13 muscles, give or take. Teeth only optional. I read somewhere, probably online, that Duchenne's smile denotes contraction of the zygomatic major muscle in conjunction with the orbicularis oculi, otherwise known as smiling with the eyes. A smile is voluntary and typically brief, lightning split across the face. It costs you almost nothing. But my mother nonetheless trained herself almost entirely out of it, believing it puckered the skin and loosened the facial muscles. Frowning too, and raising the eyebrows were both things that she frowning too and raising the eyebrows were two things that she avoided, citing magazines that advised against yawning too widely, ironing her index fingers over the places where undue emotion had caused the skin of her forehead to crease. What remained was an impassivity, white lines about underside of her lip that she smoothed away with cold cream. She spoke from the center of her mouth, patched the creases that formed around her eyes with concealer, the color of crafting glue. When she swallowed, her throat moved as if in protest at her face immobility, swelling and contracting with such force that her head was not infrequently thrown back. When she became ill, much of this self-imposed rigidity was lost. My mother's face untethered, but suddenly uncontrolled. She became prone to involuntary facial and bodily spasms, struggled to regulate her body's speed. Its movement through space, its sudden dislocating stops. It became crueler, unwatchable. She ceased to obey herself, her jaw hanging loose, and then tightening, skin buckling up in ways she could no longer prevent. I saw it and felt sick. When I went to visit her, I found it increasingly difficult not to imagine the two of us breaking down and turning to dust, just as at slightly different paces. Her first and then me. Don't you dare, she said to me once, though her speech was caught up in the back of her throat as if someone had half digested. Don't you dare look at me that way. I didn't know how I was looking, so I looked at the floor, and shortly after that, I went home. Things I remember: my mother eating honey on toast, commenting on the number of fat people she had seen at the supermarket, her juicing machine, its blades fanned upwards, the way she wrote my name in the insides of my school shoes, the tight white streak of her hair, at once blonde and grey and silver, the first frightened slip of her memory before we knew what was wrong. And she called her neighbor's cat Cassandra, though the neighbor's cat had no name, and Cassandra was the name my mother had once thought of giving me. Her wrists, her hands, and the way she drew them into her sleeves, as though insulted. Her tableau videos, the strange sleepwalking manner in which she occasionally stood at the kitchen counter and stirred her index finger round the peanut butter jar. The sound of her opening up a crab at the breakfast table, the gills and digestive organs stewed between the plates. The fact that she was always thinner than me and worked at it. Her feet, the gentle grasp and then drop of a hug that I had initiated, sorry. The sun hat she kept on the phrenology head in the hole. The blue eyes and smell like eider down. The fact she died during the 2-minute silence in November. The lack of care she gave to the plans of other extending. Oh, okay. So, sorry, I had a moment of thinking that she was referring to the armistice, the celebration of the end of the First World War. So she died. So Miri's mother died on the 11th of November. The fact that she died during the 2-minute silence, because usually during on that day we do 2-minute silence or 1 minute. The fact that she died during the 2-minute silence in November, the lack of care she gave to the plans of others, extending even to the armistice, her contradictory stance on almost everything. The time when I was 7 and she leaned out of the window of her car to shout at a boy who'd called me a bitch on the playground. The fact of her face behind my face. The way she asked about Leah only twice and then stopped asking. Her fingernails embedded in me, far past the point of safe removal. It seems like she probably didn't like Leah, and probably the fact that she was lesbian. The phone rings too late to be good news. Though when I pick it up, the news is nothing and no one is speaking at all. This has happened a couple of times in recent weeks, and each time the call is from a private number. In the morning, I call Carmen and ask whether she was trying to get in touch with me the night before. Not me, she says. And anyway, you have my number. If it is me calling, you'd know. Well, you may be calling from a private number and you just didn't notice? No, definitely not. But are you absolutely sure? Absolutely sure. I didn't call you last night, Miri. I was watching the pottery show. Then I went to bed. Carmen is obsessed with a television show where a group of contestants construct clay and pottery likenesses of different celebrity guests and are judged in terms of accuracy, artistic merit, and level of offense calls to the celebrity in question. I've never watched it, although I have occasionally heard my neighbors watching it. I couldn't say on the strength of this whether it is the show I'd recommend. I'm worried about you, Miri, Carmen is saying now. You're beginning to sound a bit Joan Crawford. I tell her I'm fine, that last night's call was probably just from an insurance company or someone jerking off. Carmen asks if I want to come round and watch returns of the poetry show with her, but I tell her I have to look after Leah and hang up. Did you know, Leah says when I turn to look at her, that seabirds eat more plastic relative to their size than any other animal in the ocean? She is sitting on the sofa, face tilted towards the windows. And when I ask what she is talking about, she doesn't answer. I come over and sit beside her on the sofa, wonder about trying to take her hand. She is swaddled in her floor-length dressing gown, hunkered down, the wishbone span of her shoulders beneath the terry cloth. I find I want to measure her, get up and fetch a length of measuring tape from the kitchen, bring it back and kneel on the sofa at Leah's side. Come here, I say, and she looks at me. When we decided to get married, I took the same tape measure to gauge Leah's ring size, and having done so, decided to measure all of her, wrapping the metal strip around her waist and her upper thighs, and the place where one bicep was bigger than the other, measuring the line of her clavicles and the distance between each fingers and the floor. I noted each of these measurements down on a piece of paper and kept it, joking that it would allow me to reconstruct a perfect imitation Leah, should I ever happen to lose her. Of course, I ultimately just ended up losing the paper with the measurements. Somewhere between throwing out old furniture between an afternoon's innocuous cleanup, it simply passed out of existence the way things will do, and it never even really occurred to me. To mind. I measure Leah again now. The limited parts I can reach outside the dressing gown, wrap the strip around her wrists and upper throat and forehead, take the length of her collarbone and the distance between her nose and cheekbones and chin. I'm thinking about the sides of the bath as I do this, about the interminated matter, which I find myself scrubbing day after day, about a certain mutability in Leah's stride and looks and presence, a certain ebbing about the way I don't always hear her when she comes into the room. I note everything down, but having done so, I find I can't tell whether these new measurements mean anything, whether Leah is smaller or lesser or different, since I don't remember the measurements I took before. The therapist agrees to see us over Skype, as Leah had been complaining more often about a lack of sensation in her feet and fingertips, and doesn't want to make the trip. I tell the therapist I'm finding it difficult to take things seriously, that I'm finding it difficult to act as though any of what's happening is real. You're finding it difficult to connect, she says, and writes something down, and then the internet connection on her end shutters like the punchline of a lazy joke. I should say, she adds, and her picture readjusts, that I really would find it easier to speak to the pair of you. This kind of therapy can't work when only one of you is present. I explained to her that Leah is in the bathroom, has been in the bathroom with the door locked since the previous evening. In fact, which is new. Wait, she spent the whole, let's say they maybe see once or twice a week. She's in the bathroom with the door locked since the previous evening. Sorry. I in my head it was the previous session. So she's been locked in the bathroom for a whole day. Okay. So now it's not just a couple of hours. It seems like it's the whole day. Okay. Leah. I don't know who I'm writing this for, really. I think I need to explain what happened, but it's hard when so much of it happened in the dark. I need to talk about the days and not knowing what was a day, not knowing how to keep track or what it was that separated night from morning, not knowing how to keep ourselves from going mad. The noise first started at night, or really what we refer to as night, since it came along enough after an equally arbitrary stretch of daytime. A sudden creak around the southmost side of the craft, a long, wide, billowing motion. It was a notion that seemed to pulse and then retract, like a beating, like the back and forth of wings or of swimming, a noise I can't really explain. We had moved into the rear chamber by this point, and were sitting around the table. Sometime previously, I had checked the shower in the wash stall and found it still in operation, the water running and evidently free of salt. That's something anyway, Jalka had said when I reported this, slipping past me into the stall to turn the shower on and tilt her head back, opening her mouth. Opening her mouth. We had eaten of a fashion, cleaned up after ourselves at one point. Cleaned up after ourselves. At one point, Matteo had folded down one of the bunks and settled down as if to sleep, only to get straight up again. When the noise first came, Matteo suggested Wells and Jelka. Sorry, what I'm saying. When the noise first came, Matteo suggested Wells. Okay, so there were Wells pushing the vessel. Angelica shrugged at him, pushed a hand through the hair and her temples, still damp from the shower. Still doesn't mean it's Wells. I've never heard a well that sounds like that. The noise seemed to shiver and retreat for a moment, a long wail that faded down into something more like a grinding, like the pull and give of something caught between teeth. I thought about the dark beyond the windows and said nothing, shook my head at the tingle of fright that sat poised at the base of my spine and preparing to struggle higher. The ocean, I had to remind myself, was a place I felt safe. And thinking about the ocean was the method by which I felt safest. When the noise returned, this time on the opposite side of the craft, and lowering in words, swooning in words, it's hard in retrospect to assign a tone. I closed my eyes and thought about the shifting shell soft texture of an octopus mantle, and after a while, I felt better, opening my eyes again to find that Matteo and Jelka were still arguing about whether or not the noise might be a well. I started to say something, but at this point there was a rattle around the base of the craft, a hum and screech that seemed to come from somewhere against the exterior structure, beyond the lower hatch leading to the escape trunk, as though something were knocking to be let in. There have been all sorts of unexplained sounds recorded in deep water, and almost all of these are actually just sounds of glacier calving, the aftershocks of the ice sheets moving overland. Miri used to watch programs which made much of these so-called mysteries, docu-style American deep dives into popular phenomena which always ended on a note of jittery speculation. So is there a simple explanation, or is it something altogether more sinister? Only you can decide. Miri would grin at me at the conclusion of these programs. nod her head very seriously, and pretend to be convinced. You're not you're no fun, she would say when I explained to her the process of seabed gouging, the sounds emitted when the keel of an iceberg drifts into shallower water and scraps along the bottom of the sea. Yeah, she would nod. Or maybe it's octopus people, like the show said. All of which is to say that sounds in deep water are not unexpected and often far more easily explained than you think. We weren't scared, is what I'm really trying to say here. We had far more pressing things to be alarmed about, and which were as yet unexplained. Pushing back her bench, Jalka stood and walked over to the lower hatch, tapped her toe against the hand wheel and frowned. The escape trunk sat at the base of the craft and operated in a manner similar to any airlock, sealed off from the main body of the ship and designed to match the air pressure of the outside, which would allow the outer door to be opened. In our current situation, of course, it was completely useless as opening the outer door to deep sea water pressure would result in whoever was in the escape trunk being instantly crushed. This was not an expedition which had ever anticipated any one of us going outside. Our brief had been strictly to observe and map any life we encountered, not to collect or take back. Even so, there could be no theoretical harm in opening up the inner hatch to check what was down there, whether some piece of machinery had come loose or something in one of the drain valves was causing the sound that continued to well up through the floor. Jelka tapped her toe against the handwheel a second time, tilted back on one heel, and stepped away, still frowning downwards. Don't be daft, she said. Don't be silly, she said. Though no one had said anything. And shortly after this, she came back to the table and sat down with her back to the hatch. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we're going to read the last pages of the Midnight Zone. Okay, stay with me. Miri. I knock on the bathroom door, then wander through to the bedroom where I stand for a minute, picking things up and putting them down again, drawing my toe in circles through the carpet of hair that has formed over the actual carpet. I haven't been cleaning in here. It feels so specifically Leah's space now, and everything seems unpleasantly furred over and unwashed. I have always been neater than Leah, although in the old days, much of this was simply due to my being at home more consistently. I wore it as a badge of honor, nonetheless, picking up abandoned glasses with a sigh and ferrying them to the dishwasher. I don't really think it's that hard, I used to say a lot. And she would apologize and fill the kitchen sink with soap suds and really, now I think about it, was an absolute waste of life. I don't realize that Leah has emerged from the bathroom and is standing behind me until I have to catch her shadow in the corner of my eye and jump. Fucking hell! She doesn't move, only frowns at me briefly before crossing to the bed and sitting down. I think about being cold in the mornings, about pushing my feet down beneath the bed sheets and finding hers. I think about Leah taking off her makeup in bed, the blurry crescent of mascara across the cotton disc that she would pull on the bedside table. Come over here, she says. And And I'm surprised, but do as I'm told. I sit beside her on the bed and let our shoulders brush, then lean away again. This gentle touch and then removal. I feel for a moment that I understand the whole bright dailiness of our life before this. The morning glances at at the bathroom, at the bathroom sink, the spite of toothpaste, the cramp and comfort of our hall in living room and kitchen. Understand it and also understand that it is gone. I lean away and she doesn't follow me. Clamshelled in her dressing gown and scratching idly at the inside of one arm. I was thinking that it's unfair of me, she says, to hog this bedroom when it is only mine, when it isn't only mine. I say nothing, and she nods as though I have. I was thinking, she says, that you can have it if you want. I don't mind switching. I look at her, think of saying, I don't think switching would make a difference. Think of saying, why don't you just slip in the bath? You spend enough time there as it is, saying, and say none of this. I'm fine, I tell her, and she nods and continues to scratch at her arm. I'm surprised when she leans back against me, a toweling shoulder touching mine again, a head dipping into the crook of my neck and holding there. I don't know what to say to this, really. It isn't that we haven't touched since she came back. Between one thing and another, I've touched her often, though this has chiefly been in the form of blood mopped up, and hair held back as she vomited water. This is different. I find it difficult to remember the feeling of reciprocation, difficult to locate the muscle memory required of me. I let my head tilt sideways, touch my cheek to the top of her head, find that I badly want to cry. I think, she says, that there is something that's seriously wrong with that seriously that oh sorry I think, she says, that there is something that's seriously wrong with me. I keep thinking about Jelka. I keep thinking about what we thought we were doing down there. What are you talking about? I say, but she only shakes her head. She is still scratching at the inside of her arm, and this time she shows me, pulls the sleeve of her robe back further than I have seen it than I have seen in forever. Reveals the changed texture of her skin, the rubbed raw glint of something unfamiliar. What's that? I ask, and she shakes her head, pulls up her other sleeve, then parts the floor-length folds of the dressing gown to show me her legs, pulls the cord of the waist and shows me everything. It is not at all what I expected. All those times when I looked at the scuffed off particles of matter in the bathtub and imagine her flayed and fraying beneath her claws, it is something else, and I don't know what to call it or what to say. I look at her and think briefly of the strange oyster sheen of her underarm and elbow creases in the first long weeks of her return, of the way she had shown me and said with a bland sort of certainty that she'd been told it would go away. I think too about the way she had bled from the face and the gum line, so many mornings of bleeding that have since petered out, as though there might be no more blood to lose. Now, from mid-calf to upper thigh, along her sides and then across her breasts and up along her arms and mid-forearm, she is at first surf white, uncertain, and then changing as I look at her, white to blue to green, her skin adrift, in texture, somehow unmoored, as though it only floats upon the surface of her flesh. I think we need to get you to a doctor, I say, in a useless tone that she seems barely to register. I don't feel very good, she says, as though I haven't spoken. And now that I have seen her, I know that her voice is not the same, but rather a voice that seems to drown in air, unused to oxygen. I think, she says, that there was too much water when we were down there. I think we let it get in. I look at her and see the way her eyes appear to spill their irises, the way the pulse throbs hard in her throat and at her wrist, and at her wrist, as if in answer to some failing inner rhythm. A bright knife of memory. My mother holding her hands out flat in front of her, the tremor that wouldn't subside when she filled it, the finger and thumb that wouldn't respond to her efforts to pinch them together. I feel wrong, she had said, her voice clear in a way it increasingly seemed not to be. And I'd registered the impulse to throw my arms around her, to struggle against whatever was happening, to tell her I'd make it all right. To tell her that I'd make it all right. I think, I said to Leah, I think we should take you back to the bathroom. I don't know why I say this, really, except that when the bathtub has been filled and I have eased her down into the water, she seems less troubled. She ducks her head, the throbbing at her throat and wrist recedes from view. I kneel beside the bath and watch her shift herself, the pull and shrink of skin around her knees and ankles, the color taking on new shades. First white, then blue, then something else. I look around the bathroom and think about nothing, really. Stupid things. The way I always used to floss and brush and mouthwash, where Leah only brushed. The way I used to sit on the edge of the bath and read to her and drink beer while she washed her hair with water poured from a plastic vase because she preferred it to standing up in the shower. The way she never managed to wash the conditioner out of the tops of her ears. I look at her now and know what has been true since she returned. This change, this dragging tide beneath her surface. I watch the water dribble from the corner of her mouth and do not know whether it is simply bathwater or something spilling from inside. I take a flannel and wipe her, gently cup her head, and wonder what it is I feel beneath my palm that isn't hair or skull, but something other. I used to imagine the sea as something that ceased and then quietened, a froth of activity tempering down into the dark. And still, I know now this isn't how it goes, that things beneath the surface are what have to move and change to cause the chain reaction higher up. Okay, right. So this is the end of the Midnight Zone. And tomorrow we will start a new section of the book, which is called the Abyssal Zone. And here again, we've got the confirmation, I believe, that she is in mutation, that Leah is in mutation, and we have evidence here that she feels more comfortable and more in her natural habitat, new natural habitat, when she is in water, and that she is becoming a marine creature, a sea creature. I can't clearly picture um, the the texture of her skin. You know, the author is describing the way her skin is changing, but personally, I can't really picture that in my head yet. Um, but it seems like she's um, um, taking or her body is transforming or into and is having a new form, and is taking a new shape. I don't know. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions or any suggestions of what kind of creature, sea creatures she might become. I have an idea of we will discuss that in the live workshop this Saturday. But I this I don't know, it's just my interpretation and maybe my imagination that's thinking that, and in relation to the other event that happened in the other um, stories that we learned from Leah, that might indicate us the kind of sea creature she's turning into. I don't know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this live reading, this long session. Yeah, it was a very long session today. We read quite a lot of pages. Make sure you subscribe to the book club to attend the live workshop this Saturday. And also remember, you can purchase the 3-part live workshop of Daisy Jones and the Six, and start read and I hope that this workshop will help you to read the novel and have a companion, a reading companion. And I wish you a beautiful end of the day. Yes. Bye bye, Keti. Thank you so much for attending the live. And I will see you tomorrow. Yes, live at 2 p.m. It's a different time than today. So 2 p.m. Central European time or Paris time. For session 7, we will read pages 137 to 155. Right? So that's it for me. Enjoy your evening or the rest of your day. Bye bye.